Heather, thank you so much for joining us on This is Purdue. We're thrilled to have you here.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be back. I love Purdue, so thank you. This is going to be so much fun.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited. So tell us about your journey to Purdue. What made you, come here? You're not from this area, right? So how did you find out about Purdue?
That's right. No, I'm not a local. As a matter of fact, I was growing up in Nevada and then Colorado, and going through the search process. Purdue came up on my horizon because of just the quality of their academics. And they had an airport. Originally, I thought I wanted to go into aerospace engineering. And as you know, Purdue holds one of the premier aerospace engineering departments in the world. And so it was affordable, it was excellent. And to be honest, I need a little independence from my parents. So that might have, crossing state lines might have been part of that too.
Sure.
But no, I in many ways, some of the decisions we make about our lives and the vectors that they take, they might not seem as monumental as they end up being, but I can't begin to describe how important it was to my life's path that I came to Purdue, and how grateful I am that I did.
How do you feel being back here on campus?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful to see how the campus has grown, how it's evolved, how it's changed, how so many of the things that were really special to me as a student, both are enduring as well as changing, because the student body is different today than when I went to school.
Right.
And so I think it's great that Purdue is, it's continuing to stay relevant to the needs of the students today, while still maintaining those touchstones that are really important to all of us, and as I said, are enduring.
Absolutely. So when you got to Purdue, did you already kind of have that passion for flight from your dad, or did you develop it at Purdue? Tell us about that.
I've been crazy about airplanes ever since I was a little girl, and I think I come by it honestly, right? Because my dad's a pilot, a fighter pilot, and so I grew up around all that, but I'm also a third generation pilot. His father was a pilot, which was partly how, he became enamored with the miracle of flight, the joy of flight. So I grew up around aviation, I grew up around airplanes, I grew up seeing my dad fly, and there was really, little more that I wanted to do than to be that,
And with the College of Liberal Arts, that's where you came from at Purdue. How have you used that throughout your career now?
I am so grateful that I went through the College of Liberal Arts, because at the time I went and I got an English degree because I had a passion for literature, and it was something that I really enjoyed in high school. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with that, but what I've discovered is that what we do in the liberal arts, the School of Liberal Arts, should be the school of cognitive learning, right? Because what it teaches us to do is how to think about problems, how to decompose and deconstruct issues, how to synthesize, how to recognize patterns, how to, really do that analysis at the qualitative and the quantitative level. Very different than from engineering. Engineering is a specific skill set, very different than the scientific process. What liberal arts teaches all of us, no matter what discipline we're in, are those critical thinking skills that we need to have for the more fuzzy, messier parts of life, which, to be honest, is what most of us do on our daily basis. So I can't imagine a better college to have gone to, better discipline and training to have gone to, that could have prepared me for what I'm doing today.
And what was one of your favorite memories at Purdue? Do you have any that really stick out, or a couple that you want to share?
Oh, goodness. All of us that have gone through Purdue, especially having done my bachelor's and my master's here, so many excellent memories. Being part of the first air race team for Purdue and standing at that team is really important to me, especially having seen where the students who came in after me took that team, that organization, and also the fact that Purdue, the team that I raced on with Crystal Lewis, she was the pilot, that what we did there was the pioneer for all the college teams getting to participate and race within the Air Race Classic. That's especially, that's important to me. I do have to say the faculty is another, to me, key piece of my favorite memories. How personal the faculty were, how involved they were, not just in my classes, but in my life, and helping me find direction, helping me take that next step, providing that kind of encouragement. And we all have developed, enduring relationships and from the friendships that we have here. But the other thing that I think is really important that is a special memory from Purdue, and you'll laugh at this, it was my time as a waitress at a diner called Utopia, which is no longer a business. But what I did there was I learned a work ethic, that no job is beneath you. And I enjoyed it. And I got to interact with the student body from all across campus. And so it was part of just being involved with who we are as Purdue that was really important.
I always say, like, everyone should be a waitress or a waiter at some point in their life.
Yes, exactly, right.
You learn how to deal with everything.
That's right, yeah.
So tell us more about you and Crystal, flying in that competition. And I imagine people are still doing it from Purdue today, from way back when you did.
Yes, Purdue is still racing today, and they have an excellent winning record. I mean, I don't know how they placed this year, but I know that they placed in the top 10 multiple times, and they might even be one of the winningest university teams in the race. But getting to do that with Crystal is really special, certainly because one of the things that Purdue did was they connected us with some of the women Air Force service pilots.
Oh, wow.
Who were also racing. So they were our mama birds and we were their baby chicks. And to get the mentor from those women was just incredibly special because of what they had done, how they had served our nation in World War II, and then how they were passing it forward to us. And the chance to be able to go race with Crystal, who she is just fantastic. She is a total professional, very focused, very competitive, but also just a ton of fun. And she has gone on to be very successful in her aviation career as well. So what better place than Purdue to launch us?
Absolutely. So do you have any favorite professors as you look back, or any other mentors? You mentioned those women that you flew with, but anyone else that comes to mind?
I would say Dick Thompson, Bob Lamb, and Susan Curtis were really key in my development. Dick Thompson really helped turn me into who I could become. He fostered my intellectual curiosity. He encouraged my spunk. I was a little wild. I was a little spunky, but he loved that. But he helped me channel that in a really productive way. Susan Curtis and Bob Lamb encouraged me to take my GRE, go into graduate school, and that was a really key stepping stone for me in terms of honing my critical thinking abilities, honing my writing abilities, and then they also really supported me in my move to the Air Force.
Right, and so when you were getting your master's here, it came out that women could now be fighter pilots. Mm-hmm. What were you thinking at that time? What was going through your mind?
Yes. At the same time, I was like, am I good enough? I mean, I'm in graduate school for liberal arts. I failed engineering student. I really love the math, but I was not good enough for the computer sciences. And I just have to just be frank and admit that. But I was liberal arts. Do liberal arts students go off and become fighter pilots? But yes, they do. Yes. And again, I really have to thank Bob Lamb and Susan Curtis and Dick Thompson. They all were incredibly supportive. I don't think that was the path that they had planned for me, but they knew that had always been a passion for me, and their support helped me make that pivot.
So fast forward, you're one of the only females in your class at the Air Force, within the Air Force, or how did that go with you've said that the men were very supportive of you, but how was it competing against all these men?
Well, everyone's competing against each other.
Sure.
At the same time, we're also working to support each other, right? We have a term called cooperate and graduate, and that's not about cheating. That's about supporting each other through the process. That's studying together. That's being encouraging and supporting of each other, and noticing when someone's struggling, and hey, what can I do to help you out? Going through pilot training, which is the most competitive element of this, they were utterly fantastic. Both the students and my instructor pilots. And again, going through my B course for the F-16, the basic course where I learned to fly and earned my qualifications to fly the F-16. But to be honest, going into the fighter squadron was a little bit more challenging because that's where I was truly the first and only female fighter pilot in my squadron. And there was a group of guys that did not want me there and actively tried to undermine me. There were a small group of guys that were totally supportive because why not? And then there was a large in the middle saying, well, we've never seen anything like this before. Let's see how it happens. And so it was my job to win them over with my performance, to be the best that I could possibly be, and prove to them that I deserved to be there through, my knowledge, my skill, how well I knew the jet, how well I flew the jet, how good of a wingman I was. And that helped, I think, prove to them that, yeah, who cares if she's a girl? Right. Validated the guys that were the initial supporters and ultimately won over the guys that initially didn't want me to be there.
What would you say your biggest challenge was throughout that time period?
It was understanding and navigating the social elements of the fighter squadron. Because I always say, the jet doesn't care if you're a man or a woman. It just cares if you know your stuff and has the right, and if you've got the right stuff. But the squadron is fundamentally about people and the organization and the culture of that organization. So navigating that was my biggest challenge. Flying the jet, learning the tactics, going out on our sorties, that was not the hard part. The hard part was, to be honest, it was very lonely at times.
Right.
Because in some ways it was culturally risky for the individuals that supported me to mentor me, because I was the only woman. And so it could be very lonely, and that was hard. But it was the social piece of figuring out, how do I navigate this environment? Because it was a very different culture that I had never experienced before.
Well, when you look back to what advice would you give, you've been through this, to any females, whether it be flight school, fighter training, or just engineering, right? A lot of females are outnumbered. What advice would you give to them?
Well, first of all is ultimately it comes down to performance, right? I never cared that I had to work twice as hard, that I had to be 150% in order, to be compared with my male colleagues, because I wanted to be the best anyways. So that didn't matter to me. Was it unfair? Sure, but life isn't fair.
Right.
So, stop whining about it and get to work. And that ethic, I think, is really important, because it then proves your credibility and it proves that you have earned the right to be there. It's hard, but that's also why it's important that as a woman, if you need to identify who your allies are and reach out to other women as well. Because developing those relationships is really important to keeping your heart and your soul alive when you sometimes have to go through hard things. And to be honest, a huge piece of our success in any career, in any discipline, is how we navigate those social environments. Organizations are fundamentally made of people. And so you can be as technically competent or technically excellent as possible, but if you cannot navigate the human landscape, there will be limits to your potential. So it's really important to establish those relationships, to establish those friendships, and support each other so that you can learn to navigate successfully those organizations. And for leaders of those organizations, it's important that they maintain their cultures to be mission purposed. Every organization has a culture, and that's important because that allows us as team members to, trust each other, to be aligned with what our mission is, with what we're going to go do. And there are behaviors, norms, codes, beliefs, and actions and traditions that are associated with all that make us successful. Leaders have to be very aware of how that culture is mapped to their purpose. Because if they begin to allow that culture to diverge,
Right.
That's when the performance of the overall team goes down. So for example, a lot of the, super macho dudes that didn't think I should be there just because I was a girl, that's an example of culture creep. What does being a girl have to do with putting bombs on target on time, right? So I was very fortunate that the squadron commanders that I had, J.C. Witham, Marc Sasseville, they actually were very focused on, look, we're fighter pilots, and yes, we've got certain norms and codes and beliefs and cultures. We're very focused on making sure that those are mapped directly to our mission purpose. And when you do that, as long as everyone is bought into those values and codes and behaviors, it actually creates the space for diversity. Because, hey, I believe in all of the norms that we believe in as fighter pilots, and I'm going to do my best to adhere to that because I believe in it, and it is. So, does it matter if I'm a girl? No. So that's actually one of the really neat things is when we focus on the mission and we create a culture that supports that mission, then we actually create the opportunity for diversity and inclusion.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. We want to get to your story on 9/11, of course, but we're more interested in learning who you are as a Boilermaker, right? So what would you say the Boilermaker spirit and this community, being back here, like what does that mean to you?
What I love about the Boilermaker spirit is that we're kind of gritty and rough and tumble, but we're really good at what we do, right? And we're leaders, we are innovators. Yes. So there's nothing that we can't do, and we're willing to get our fingernails dirty to do it if we have to. So to me, that's really kind of where we bring all this thought leadership and innovation and research and experimentation and put it to the test.
Yes. Okay, so tell us about your morning waking up on September 11th. Was it just obviously another morning for you?
That morning on September 11th was like every other American that morning. It was totally ordinary and everyday. I woke up, I put my flight suit on, I ate my Cheerios, I kissed my dog goodbye, and I drove off to work. There was nothing special about that day. But I do remember on the East Coast in DC, and frankly, and it was in New York as well, how crystal blue the sky was. Not a cloud. No haze. It was deep and blue as far as you could see.
So you had no idea what was about to happen?
No one had any idea what was going to happen.
Okay, so tell me about when you got that call. What were you feeling? How did that obviously change your life?
We were in a scheduling meeting. I was not scheduled to fly that day, although I desperately hoped that I would have because I loved flying. I was a young wingman. It was my job to fly. But I'm in a scheduling meeting when one of our enlisted troops, David Chunks Callahan, just comes walking in and says, an aircraft hit the World Trade Center. And so we all got up and we walked to the squadron bar where our television was, and that's where we saw the images that everyone else saw of the towers burning and the replay footage of the airliners hitting the towers. We knew we had to get airborne and we knew we had to protect. But the problem for us was that as the DC National Guard, we didn't have the chain of command that could authorize us to launch. And the other problem is that because we were not an alert unit, the United States, after the fall of the Soviet Union, had just cut the Air Force in half, literally, and dropped all of our alert units. We didn't have any missiles. We had no live ordnance on board. So we had two problems. We had to get the authorization to launch, and we had to get live weapons on the aircraft.
Did anyone ever think, it was an accident maybe that someone flew into the World Trade Center, or you guys knew?
When Chunk said the first time, hey, an airplane flew into the World Trade Center, we looked at each other and were like, how does that happen?
Right,
you know?
right.
We thought it was a light aircraft, like just flying up and down the Hudson and took a wrong turn and bounced off a building. We didn't take it seriously until he came back the second time and said it was on purpose. And that was when we saw the images. It was very clear that this could not be an accident. It was very clear that our nation was under attack.
And how did they, choose who was going to go up there? How were you chosen to do that?
In the squadron that morning, we had a very skeleton crew because we had just come back from a long deployment. And as a guard unit, most of our pilots were part-timers. So they're airline pilots, they were off on their jobs. As a matter of fact, we only had enough personnel in the squadron to send a 3-ship. We normally send 8 ships off to train that morning. Marc Sasseville was our director of operations. He was our senior leadership within the squadron that morning. And he was not going to let anyone else lead that mission because when the call came, we knew it was going to be a suicide mission if we were successful. And he has a gorgeous wife and wonderful, just adorable children. But he was not going to lead from behind. I would love to think that he picked me because I was a good wingman, but I think honestly he probably picked me because I had no family. I didn't have a spouse, I didn't have any children, all I had was my dog. And so I think that was why he chose me, because he told Raisin, Dan Kane, and Brandon Rasmussen, his call sign was Igor, and they both had families. They were to wait until they had missiles on board. So I believe that's why SAS selected me.
How did you feel when he selected you? What was going through your mind?
I did not want to get left behind. None of us did.
So everyone was eager to go.
Everyone was eager to protect and defend. That is our oath. That's why we exist. I was grateful that he selected me.
What did it feel like getting in that plane that day?
Can I say this?
Yeah.
Don't fuck it up. If anything mattered at that moment in time, it was getting it right. I wasn't trained for this. I mean, we don't train to do suicide missions,
Sure.
right? I had never been taught how to scramble an airplane, and since then, obviously, I have, because we now have an alert unit. But the airplanes weren't ready. They weren't hot-cocked. So we had to make up our procedures on the fly. I was taxiing. My radar wasn't awake, my missiles weren't awake, I didn't have a navigation platform. I wasn't even strapped into the jet, so I couldn't have ejected, right? I didn't even have my seatbelts on. But all that mattered was that we got out there as soon as we could and that we found the airliner that we believed was inbound. Unfortunately, the passengers on Flight 93 had already taken control of the airliner and had already crashed it.
What was going through your mind when you knew that it was a plane crash and you couldn't do anything more about it?
We didn't find out that Flight 93 had been downed. SAS took us out, I don't know how far, because I didn't have navigation system, probably a little over 100 miles.
Okay.
We went out to the northwest over the Pennsylvania countryside. We didn't see any smoke, which is surprising because we should have.
Right.
But I don't recall seeing any smoke. And then turned us around because we had sanitized the airspace. And we couldn't afford to go any further out because if we were even just a little bit off on our axis, we could have allowed the airliner to flank us, and we didn't know that it was down. So once we had sanitized the airspace from the direction that we believed the airliner was coming from, SAS took us back to DC to fly the Combat Air Patrol. And then we set up a Combat Air Patrol with a counter-rotating cap centered over Reagan National. And then the quits from Langley, some F-16s who were flying alert from Langley, showed up. They capped up at 18,000 feet and they had missiles. So then my anxiety started to go down. And then Igor and Raisin got airborne. And so then we switched up the cap from there. Potomac approach was phenomenal. This is just an amazing story of how ordinary people rise to extraordinary circumstances, stealing that quote from Admiral Halsey, Bull Halsey from World War II. Potomac approaches air traffic control, and their normal job is to separate airliners and put them all on little highways to take them down for a safe landing. And now here SAS and Racing are asking air traffic control to bring aircraft together and start talking fighter pilot language and using military speak. And they pivoted and did that immediately. They were so mentally agile. And then they started calling out tracks and telling us who they were and where they were going. So they helped make sense of what was a confusing airspace. And they were just utterly fantastic. So how people pitched in and began to make it all work, even though none of it was planned, right. It was all ad hoc, but people just did what needed to be done.
How did you feel when you finally landed or on the ground again?
I really had to pee. We had been up there for
How many hours?
I think like 4.
Oh, wow.
Because we tanked.
Okay.
And we were waiting until they had more missiles to put on the second loaded jets for us to take up. And we also had to wait for another 2 ship to launch and relieve us. So it was some time before we were able to land. I don't know the exact hours, but my bladder was certainly stressed.
So then once you were on the ground, did you know that you were staying on the ground? Did you think there was a chance that you could go back up?
No, we had to launch again because we were mid-manned. We were a skeleton crew. So they were going to fly us until they had enough pilots to sustain another go and then another go. And what was amazing is by the time we landed, our enlisted crew, Sandy Campbell, she was our chief master sergeant. We called her a witch. She was fantastic. She already had cots laid up everywhere. There were like multiple thermoses of coffee. She started like a buffet line for people because she just transitioned us directly into 24/7 operations. But I knew I wasn't going to get to go, whew, that was a close one, and go home. We were going to continue to fight the fight until we could reach stabilized operations. And so Sass and I were whisked off to go brief the leadership of the National Guard, and then brought us right back to jump into another set of jets to take off again.
So what was that work day? How many hours until you got to sleep?
I have no idea. But on that second sortie is when President Bush came back. And so Sass and I were given the task of intercepting Air Force One and then helping with the escort, because he did have dedicated fighter escort. But in this kind of scenario, we had no idea what other things might be planned.
Right.
And so trying to provide beefed up air security for him coming back was a priority.
What was the camaraderie like that day?
I'm not really sure I would call it camaraderie. We were just getting the job done. And we were all in it together, and we were taking care of each other, but we were focused on the mission.
And when did the pieces start falling together of what had happened, when it was safe? How did that go?
So for me, my second sortie was anticlimactic because now I had missiles, right? So I know what to do with this. But we were all really uncertain for weeks, right? And I think the entire nation was, because
Sure.
we didn't know what was the scale of the threat, what was the potential for additional attacks, and so we were all prepared for anything that might happen. We were also working to transition and stabilize the Combat Air Patrol and pass that authority over to the active duty Air Force, because we had been operating and owning it, if you will. And so Jeff Johnson, Tuna Johnson, he was our ops group commander at the time, was in the process, and he was working all of those details in addition with Dan Raisin-Kane, our weapons officer, Marc Sasseville, J.C. Witham, who is our squadron commander, doing all of that work to normalize those operations. But for us, for all of us normal guys in the squadron, we just moved into 24/7 combat air patrol operations. So my life was midnight to 4 a.m. was my time in the sky, and I did that for nearly a year.
Oh, wow. Okay. And I've read that, we talked about your dad earlier. So he was a commercial airline pilot at this time.
Yeah.
So he could have been in that plane that you went up and were targeting, right?
There could have been a possibility that my dad was flying the United Airlines flight that we were targeted against. As a matter of fact, one of his close friends and colleagues, Jason Dahl, was the captain on Flight 93 that my dad had worked with when he was in the United Training Center. But to be honest, I didn't put that together that day. Certainly, I was thinking about other things. My mom was the one who began to see, like, that could have been. But it never crossed my mind at the time. And honestly, even if it had, it would not have made a difference.
You had a job to do.
Yes. And my dad, as an airman, an Air Force officer, he would have expected nothing less.
So walk us through how you decided to come out with this story, because you kept it private for, 10 years?
I didn't talk about that day for 10 years because I didn't do anything. Miss Sass and I were a mission failure. There was nothing special about us. On the 10th commemoration, the National Guard Bureau asked Marc Sasseville to talk about the DC Guard's response. And he asked me to tell my side of the story with him as his wingman, right? I mean,
Right.
Sassa's the real star of that flight, right? He's the flight lead. He's the guy that actually knows what's going on. I'm a green wingman. I'm a young guy. I'm following him. And that's when I began to tell the story and really began to reckon with what that day meant, what it meant to me, and I think what it means for our nation.
Had you two ever talked about it together prior to that, or it was just kind of,
No.
Wow.
We never talked about it because things got busy. We had combat air patrols to do. We had a war to go off to. We had another, deployment, and things just got busy, and it wasn't special. Here's the other thing too. Yes, Sass and I were prepared to go off on a suicide mission, but anyone would have been willing to do the same thing. And in reality, the passengers on Flight 93 did. And they were just ordinary, everyday Americans. They had not raised their hands and sworn an oath of service like Sass and I had. So I don't think Sass and I view what we were willing to do as special. We just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or the right place at the right time, however you want to look at it. So there was nothing to talk about.
How does it feel talking about it now? Is it therapeutic? Is it hard for you?
It is always emotional for me, and not because of me or what coulda, woulda, shouldas. I do experience deep regret, not survivor's remorse, but deep regret that our organizational structure and the chain of command and the preparation of our country, that we were so complacent that we were ill-prepared, and placed the passengers of 93 in a position where they had to make the choices that they did. But I am also intensely grateful and inspired by the fact that they did, because it shows me that our American spirit is not dead, and that we still understand that there are things in this world that are more important than us. And so when I think about that day, it's not cathartic, it's not traumatic, but what's important to me is that we don't, the images are sensational, they're horrifying, but we shouldn't live there. Because the real lesson of 9/11 should be in all the acts of heroism, no matter how small, of how people rose to the occasion and did what needed to be done and took care of each other. And that their spirit lives on in each and every one. And that should be our real legacy. So it's important that we don't just voyeuristically sit in that sensational, self-righteous, trauma, but that we turn it into something that can truly honor their sacrifice.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm guessing this didn't impact, how you fly today. You still fly today. You have a plane or two?
3.
So clearly you are good
3's
to
a
go.
lonely number, by the way. It should be 4 or 5. Or
So this did not impact how you continue to fly.
No, it. I flew a second sortie that day, and I went out the next day and next day and next day and continued to fly. There's something about flight to me that is so transformative. It's so freeing. It's so joyful. It's so challenging. I mean, I truly think that flying forces us to be the best of who we are. No flight is ever the same. No flight is ever perfect. Every flight forces us to strive, to hold ourselves accountable, to try harder, to grow, and yet at the same time is totally transformative. And I've flown all over the country. One of the things in a small airplane at low altitude, and so I get to see the heartland as I fly over it, or the mountains, and it helps me feel connected to America in a different way. And there's so much just sheer joy to me in flying. I could never give it up.
Tell us about your call sign. Where did you?
Lucky Penny.
Okay.
So getting your call sign is a rite of passage.
Okay. I was going to ask, who chooses it? How does that work?
You do not choose it.
Okay.
The squadron gives it to you.
It's kind of more fun, right?
Well, it's more fun, but it's a rite of passage, because you don't get a call sign until you have become combat mission qualified.
Okay.
So as a young wingman, you get qualified in your airplane, but you're not combat mission qualified. You're not around. If the balloon goes up, you get left behind, right? So you still have to go through training. And through that training process, the squadron gets to know you, who you are. There's plenty of opportunities to do stupid stuff. And then when you pass your certification and get that combat qualification is when you are formally recognized as a fighter pilot and a member of the unit. So receiving your name is a very symbolic act. And it's either a play on your last name, some kind of acronym, or some word that refers to something foolish or stupid that you did, right? To keep you humble. And you don't get to choose your name. You don't get, you really don't get to get renamed. But every fighter pilot is attached to their call sign because it's that moment of recognition. It's that moment of arrival. It's that moment of becoming. Because before then, you're just an FNG, a friendly new guy. You're not really named or acknowledged. So it's really special. Better lucky than good. And I was very fortunate, before I became combat mission ready, I got to do a lot of neat deployments with the squadron. And so my timing was also very lucky. But I'd rather be better lucky than good any day.
And so the people who get the name when they were 25 and made a stupid mistake, it lives with them forever.
Lives with them forever. But you can get renamed by your squadron if you do something even stupider.
Oh, okay.
So the hazard is never gone.
Okay. That's amazing. How often do you fly today with your 3 planes?
As much as I can. I fly mostly vintage aircraft. So we have a World War II Stearman. It's a open cockpit biplane that was a trainer for World War II pilots, so the greatest generation. And we actually know that our particular aircraft flew at Sweetwater, Texas at Avenger Field with the Women Air Force Service pilots.
Wow.
And we discovered this after we bought the aircraft. So there's a really neat connection there for me between the WASP and my own service. We have a Cessna 170 from 1950, and so that's a little, that's a small tail dragger as well. And then we also have a Bucher Jungmann, which is actually a Luftwaffe trainer that is, the design is similar to the time frame of the Stearman. And it's a little open cockpit biplane as well. Very, very aerobatic, very nimble, a ton of fun to fly. And so it's interesting to see the different philosophies of design between America and Germany at the time, although Bucher was a Dutch company, between how they thought, what a primary trainer should look like. So those are the 3 aircraft we have.
And what else are you up to these days after after being this fighter pilot?
Well, so when I left the fighter squadron, I was a single mom with 2 little girls at the time, and I was fortunate to be working for Lockheed Martin. And so I worked with Lockheed Martin in their Washington operations section for over 10 years before making the transition to where I am today at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. Now, the Mitchell Institute is a think tank focused on national security, defense issues, Air Force issues, anything having to do with air power. And so that really is kind of my passion in life. And I love what I do because I'm not in a lane for what I can do. I can be as curious and as I need to be or want to be. But what I'm doing is I'm addressing issues having to do with advanced technology, future warfare concepts, policy issues that are affecting airmen today, and the defense industry, innovation, and so forth, having to do with stuff from data rights and how the industrial base to how we use information to, I just finished a study on how humans should team with autonomous combat aircraft to, you know, it's just, it spans a lot of different things. And what's important to me is, in my mind, I'm passionate about this work because it's important that the airmen that come after me are not placed in the same situation that I was on 9/11. That we as a nation owe it, it's a moral obligation to our service members to ensure that they are appropriately equipped, that they are appropriately resourced, and that they have the training that they need to be ready to be able to shape, deter, defend, and prevail for our nation's interest. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Air Force was cut by half, and over the course of the last 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's been cut by another 20%.
Wow.
So the Air Force is the smallest and the oldest and the least ready that it has ever been. So the kids that are doing the job today are actually in a worse place than where I was in 2001. And so I feel like it's a mission almost to try to educate policymakers, senior leaders, and individuals on the Hill on the things that they can do to try to resource and ensure that our airmen are set up appropriately to do the things that our nation asks them to do. And
how cool that you still get to work, you know, with flight, with the Air Force. I mean, that's amazing, and you're passionate about it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I'm not in the jet, although I wish I was, but I'm still with the people. I'm still in that community, and I'm able to leverage my experience, my operational experience, and combine that with all of the skills that Purdue taught me through the College of Liberal Arts, and bring that together in the research that I do.
And you mentioned you have 2 daughters.
I do.
I know one of them is on a tour here.
Yes, one of them's on a college tour looking at the campus.
What would that mean to you if she decided to come here?
It would be super awesome to have a legacy, to have another Boilermaker in the house. It would be fabulous.
Who do you think of when you think of Purdue? Is there any particular person? Is it a group of people?
Oh my goodness. I don't think of Purdue as a particular person because I don't think we can. Purdue is a spirit. Purdue is an ethos. Purdue becomes part of every single one of us who has been here. So I don't think of although I have memories of individual people,
sure.
What I think of when I think of Purdue, it's that spirit.
You were recently nominated as a Big Ten Trailblazer. I got to see the video. It was really cool.
Oh, thank you.
What did that mean to you? How did you feel when they told you that?
The opportunity, the privilege of being able to represent Purdue as a Big Ten Trailblazer just blows my mind. I was so humbled and excited because just think about the amazing people who Purdue has made. Mm-hmm. I mean, Purdue is the foundation of all of us who have been here. It's the foundation.
But you're one of those people.
Yeah. But I also think about all the amazing people. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
It's very humbling. It's very humbling.
And was that was that your plane and stuff in that video?
Yes.
Okay. I'll link that video for our listeners and our viewers.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Okay, last question. Why are you proud to be a Boilermaker?
Why wouldn't I be proud to be a Boilermaker? I mean, just all the things that we've talked about, what a Boilermaker means, what Purdue means, everything that we stand for, the excellence, the research, the innovation, the creativity, and the thought. also, like, if you look at just how Purdue is trying to make education acceptable or affordable to the broader population and keeping the costs down, that to me is an important piece of the legacy, as well as just that pragmatic view of how we can take education, make it available and accessible to people so that they can then, you know, grow in their own lives and their own future. So there's so much about Purdue that is meaningful to me, not just because of the legacy and the heritage that we've come from, but what they've done since I've graduated and the direction that Purdue is going. So it's exciting to be able to call this my alma mater, and exciting to be here being honored by Purdue, by the College of Liberal Arts as a distinguished alumna, and exciting to see where the university is going. It's like you go out and you meet these kids and you go, man, they're going to go do great things for this world.
Yes, we have some of them here right now as our lovely interns. Yay! Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners?
Boiler up.
Perfect ending. Well, thank you. We appreciate it. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you. This has really been an honor. Thank you so much.